Hi, I'm Rachel Dickinson and have the pleasure of being here at Hartford Family Winery in the Russian River Valley with Hailey Hartford Murray, president of Hartford Family Winery.
So glad you could come. Yeah, of course.
Yes.
Yeah, really excited to have you here.
Thank you. Yes, and I love this room that we're sitting in, and
I
we
know.
have a whole barrel room behind us, which
yeah.
is really a treat.
Exactly. So this is our upstairs tasting salon, and we use it for like customized tastings or our elevated tastings, we call them. So tastings that are either wine club members or general consumers, you guests want to be able to choose and select wines that they're particularly interested in. So it's a really beautiful, more private space. And like you said, you not only have this beautiful view of the cellar, which has a pretty unique arrangement for cellars, and we can talk about that maybe a little bit more when we actually get to taste some of the wines. But we also have, which the viewers unfortunately probably cannot see, a really beautiful balcony out looking over the tasting patio as well as the vineyards. So yeah, nice space. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Thanks. Yeah.
And I'm excited to also taste some of your fantastic wines today.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yes. So I'm excited because the first wine we're having is Bubbles.
It is, yeah. So at Hartford, we specialize in single vineyard designated wines. So wines from one little vineyard site. And we like to say wines that aren't just delicious, but really high personality wines. That being said, as we taste that wine, we'll talk a little bit more about it. But since we've purchased some of our very first vineyards, we were all really interested in making a sparkling wine. And just this year, we finally released a trio of sparkling wines, and this is one of them.
Oh, very nice. Yes.
Yeah.
So perhaps we can
go ahead and start tasting?
Yeah,
sure.
Let's begin.
Yeah. So this is our Seascape Vineyard Blanc de Blanc, and it's a non-vintage cuvee perpetual. But to get into it a little bit, when we started the winery, my parents, Don and Jenny Hartford, started the winery. They were looking for sites that, as I said, had this really high personality. And oftentimes we would make, and we still do when we were exploring whether we want to add a new single vineyard to the portfolio, we would make the wines from that site for a couple of years to see, is it just delicious or is it high personality? And then is that personality consistent year to year? Is it something that then we know is driven by that place? Because what we were really hoping to do, or I should say my parents were hoping to do, was express that sense of place. And in the early 90s when we started in 94, so I've had over 30 years now of the winery. There weren't a lot of producers making single vineyard designated wines from Russian River Valley. It was a burgeoning region for Chardonnay and Pinot Noir for sure, and a really exciting time to start a winery. But as they started to seek out these different places and, decided, which places they thought would really honor, that sense of place. One of those first vineyards became our Seascape Vineyard. And it's actually a vineyard in the newly minted West Sonoma Coast AVA. When we first planted the vines there, the viticulturalists were like shaking their heads at us. They're like, what are you doing, you crazy people? Because it was really considered a very marginal climate, and it truly is. I think there's probably been 3 vintages that we haven't been able to even make a still wine from that site. That said, what we came to find is, even though it was really marginal, the years that you could do it, sort of high risk, high reward, you had this really beautiful, very unique style of both Chardonnay and also still Pinot Noir. So it has become one of our favorites in the portfolio of single vineyards. But the sort of the dream was, well, maybe in the years we can't make a still wine, could we make a sparkling wine instead? So Seascape truly was the inspiration for the sparkling project, and it's been a long time in the works. So yeah.
Very nice. Well, I'm excited to taste it.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, cheers.
Yes, so cheers.
Of course. Yeah, so tasting really pretty today. I think one of the things we were really, most excited about personally in doing this project was that we already knew what the personality of the single vineyards were as still wines, and we were really interested to see how does that personality express itself, in sparkling form, and as our winemaker, we have 2 wonderful winemakers, Jeff Stewart and Tion Lorden. And Tian had said too that in some ways he feels like the sparkling might be even a more true expression in some ways, or a more like stripped away, in a set, a really, really beautiful, transparent version of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love this wine.
Thank you. Yeah.
And it has a beautiful effervescence and very well balanced since it's from the Sonoma Coast area. Nice acidity.
Yeah, exactly.
And beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, the things that we notice in the still wine, which we actually will be tasting next, are Seascape single vineyard still Chardonnay. But what we find in that are often these really interesting notes of like lime and saline. And while the lime is maybe a little bit more understated, I think in the sparkling, you still get that sense of salinity that I think is so interesting alongside some of those, the yeasty notes of that sort of toasted almond skin. I get sometimes on this Seascape, some really beautiful other fruit profiles too. So very nice. Thanks. So I don't know that we really said, but this is alongside the two vintage sparkling wines that we debuted this year, our Far Coast Blanc de Blanc 2014 and our Fog Dance Blanc de Noir 2014 as well. They're all three very small production, and so far are allocation only. It's actually one of the only wines besides our Arundel, which is our flagship Pinot Noir, that is allocation only at this point. We try to not, we don't have a scarcity model necessarily by design. It's usually when we're just trying to make sure that we're narrowing in the focus onto the vineyard blocks that we think are, again, most expressive of that place. Or most exciting. So that's sort of our philosophy, but most of our single vineyards are relatively small production. There are only about 300 cases each for the still wines. These sparklings are closer to about 150 to 170.
Definitely be bringing a bottle home and popping it at my celebration.
Yeah, exactly. Lots of things coming around the corner too.
So Hailey, growing up in a family where you have deep roots in wine, what are some of your earliest memories related to wine
in the vineyard? So I think some of my earliest memories are really based around the home I grew up in. My parents, when they moved to Russian River Valley, the first home they ever purchased was this little ranch house that was not much to look at in and of itself, but had a beautiful 100-year-old Zinfandel vineyard planted in the backyard. So that's the house I grew up in, and I would drive my mom crazy because I would run outside without telling her where I was going. And we had a pretty, it was a country road, but a lot of people would use it as sort of like a shortcut to get to and from other places. So they would pick up the speeds. And so being a mother now, I can see where my mom was very concerned about where was I out the front door or the back door? The back door was fine in the vineyard, but the front was not. So regardless, though, some of my earliest memories were of exploring that Zinfandel vineyard. I would take off, like I said, and I've always been a pretty petite person, but in terms of height, and I'd duck underneath those beautiful old vine Zinfandel vines. The way they grow and are planted in this, in the traditional method as bush vines. They have these in the summertime, especially, and into fall, have these huge canopies, and so you can sort of hide under them. And so those were some of my earliest memories. And I think it wasn't until I was in college, actually, and talking to people about what they thought of when we would have like table grapes, that I realized that when I think of what a grape tastes like, it was actually Zinfandel first, and not like table grapes. And that was a really odd experience, or not a typical sort of view of it. So, so those are some of my fondest memories too of growing up in the wine industry, and earliest, I should say. Oh, that's very sweet. I can just imagine that in my head. Like a little fairy forest out there, in a way. But as I grew older, I actually originally had a real interest in veterinary medicine. So my thought was that I would pursue that first, and that the wine business would probably still be there for me if I was interested as I explored that first career. But very quickly after graduating college, I ended up getting bit by the bug, as they say, and working several harvests. And so that's how I ended up in the wine industry. But and I'm very happy that I'm here, of course. But Yeah.
Yes, it's very exciting. Always a lot going on, and everything changes too.
Yeah,
so it always
exactly.
keeps you on your toes.
Exactly. Yes.
Yes.
Always something new to learn. I think that is the thing that really ultimately drew me towards it, is that whether you're talking about vineyard management practices or the making of the wine or procurement, where are you getting your glass from for your bottles?
Yeah.
What sort of materials are you using for packaging? The marketing of the wines, the sale of the wines, and then where are the barrels coming from? All of that. There's always so much more to learn, and such a really interesting, fascinating business to be in. Plus, you get to meet wonderful people.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to enjoy my last sip of this, and then I'm excited to move into the Chardonnay. Perfect.
So moving along to the Chardonnay, as I described, the Seascape Vineyard is really marginal climate. It's right on the edge of the ocean. So it is one of our most beautiful panoramic vineyards. If we ever get a chance, I'd love to take you there someday. It's a little bit of a jaunt from where we are here, Forestville of Russian River Valley, Forestville as the little town. But you drive out due west from here, and it overlooks Bodega Bay. So you drive actually through an old growth redwood forest that butts up against the vineyards itself, and then you have these cascading views down to the ocean. But that also means that it's the first place the fog hits, the last place the fog leaves. And so during the summer, when these grapes are are trying to get ripe, it can be very cold, very wet out there. We actually did a vineyard tour with our whole both tasting room team and cellar team in August, and I felt like the vineyard was showing off to us that day because it had been locked in fog all night long. And you're driving through the redwood forest first, and it sounds like rain is pelting the car because there's been so much condensation overnight that these huge droplets are just falling on top of it. And then you come out and it's still all misty, the vineyard's surrounded in fog. And there's still that same moisture is hanging on the grape clusters too. So it's a vineyard that we have to do a lot of management of to make sure that there's a lot of air, ability for airflow around the grapes. We're waiting and twiddling our thumbs until it comes in sometimes as late as late October, early November, which is pretty unheard of for picking Chardonnay in California. But as I said before, you get this really interesting salinity on the nose, lime. So we joke that there's a point in fermentation out in barrel where you pop the bung off the top and it's almost like a margarita hit you in the face. It's kind of like tea time is birthday. But it's really interesting, very stunning, bright, crisp acidity. So for people who are more akin to Chablis, this is, as close as I think you can get to it in California, in my opinion.
I'm excited to try this. I'm a fan of Chablis.
Yeah. The other thing that I think is really remarkable, and unlike perhaps Chablis or other places in California, is that even though you have that beautiful bright acidity and that lime, tart lemon fruit, you also have a really beautiful weight to the wine still. And I think oftentimes, especially in California, when you find vineyards it's hard to find vineyards that can yield that brightness. You still retain that beautiful acidity and yet still have that really beautiful, texture, that silky sort of mouthfeel.
Yeah. Wow. That is an intriguing wine.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's so interesting because it has kind of the classic flavors of a rich Chardonnay, like the lemon, but there's also stone fruit as well. It's very rich. Taste lingers on the palate, and there's very slight bite.
Yeah.
Like almost like a lime peel.
Right, exactly. And, like that tartness that, especially on the finish, I think, to your point. Yeah,
very enticing.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess while we're on Chardonnay, in terms of winemaking methods, very natural wine focused. If, before people would call it natural, in that we use all wild fermentation. So we just use native yeast. We don't inoculate our wines. And I think our barrel room really allows us to do that and feel really confident that we can keep track of what's going on in the barrel at any given time. Most producers will store their barrels on barrel racks, which is much more space efficient. Perhaps you might stack them on these metal racks and stack them, 2 to 5 high and then, 10 or 12 deep. But if you wanted to taste the barrel all the way in the back at the bottom, you would need to use a forklift, and it might take you 40 minutes before you're tasting that barrel. So what we do instead, as you can see, is store the barrels stacked too high, and then you walk down a long row of them stacked too high, and then you go up a half story, and then they're stacked another too high. And so it allows our winemakers to walk up and down these rows and really understand what's going on in the barrel at any given point, but also for us to experiment with barrels quite a bit too. So most producers, I think, will often choose their favorite 3 or 4 coopers that they'll work with, barrel makers. We work with as many as 18 in a given year, so lots of different coopers, and then within that, all different state aging, toasting levels, because we're really trying to make sure that the oak is dialed in to that vineyard site. We hope that it's never the first thing that you notice when you put your nose to the glass. We want it to be something that really complements that place, and that it uplifts or highlights something that we already really love about that individual vineyard site. So we get really geeky about oak. And I think our barrel room allows us to do that, whether it's Chardonnay, Pinot, Zin, or a couple of the other little varietals that we make.
Yeah, it definitely, you don't notice the oak at all. It just more of, enhances, just kind of like, salt and pepper type thing to a meal.
That's what we hope it to do.
Yes. So, as the president of Hartford Family Winery, what does a day in the life of Hailey Hartford Murray look like?
It's really fun, actually. Most days, everyone has their hard days, of course. I'm of course part of the Hartford family, and president of Hartford is my day-to-day job. And most of what I do for that is, the fun thing about being president is I get to touch all different aspects of the business, whether it's talking about, the design of the new, sparkling, vineyard bottles and the labels and all of that, what sort of capsule we're going to put on it, or to being able to get ready and prepare for critic tastings, of course, too. Those are actually probably, other than being out in the market and doing sales work, which I do quite a bit of still, which is fun because you're meeting with consumers, with guests, with people who are either in the industry, are enjoying the wines, and being able to, of course, have those interactions and build community that way is something that I find personally really wonderful and exciting. But outside of that, I think one of the other best days of the year is when we get to do the pre-critic tastings. We open up all of our wines. I sit down with our winemakers, Jeff Stewart and Tian Lorden, and then with my father as well, who's still very much involved and engaged in the business. And we taste through all of the single vineyards that we make. And it's sort of the litmus test, so to speak, where we say, because we started in 94 with just 3 single vineyards, but we make now over 32, which is an incredible amount. As I said earlier, some of them are very tiny bottlings and sort of more just passion projects that we couldn't help ourselves but make because they're just fun for us. But it's those pre-critic tastings are sort of our litmus test, as I said, to say, are these all really as distinct and interesting as we think they are? And it's always wonderful to come out of them and be like, yes, they're really delicious, and they're all different. We wouldn't want to make wines that are all the same.
That's a lot of wines.
It is a lot of wines. Wow, it becomes a logistical nightmare in here when the wines are first coming in and where are they going to go in which barrels. But Tian and Jeff do an incredible job of negotiating it. And then once they're in barrel, that's where they sit and they live until they're bottled, pretty much. This, again, the barrel room, it helps us in some ways, but in the first part of the planning process, it's a little much of a nightmare trying to figure out where they go. Map it out.
And I know you've worked harvests in various countries.
I have, which is fascinating.
Yeah, it's very exciting. What has those experiences been like? I'm just curious because I'm yet to work a harvest.
Well, they were fantastic. So I may have said, I was originally interested in being a veterinarian. And so while I was I had just graduated college and I was getting ready actually to apply to veterinary school, I ended up meeting someone special and out here in wine country. And he was living at the time in Florida. And so in order to get him out here, I encouraged him to come work a harvest with me. And I had worked one before here in France, actually, when I was 18. So I understood the amount of work that was involved, although that was a much smaller producer and, not maybe quite as long of a duration of a harvest as we have here in Russian River Valley. But all of that said I don't think he anticipated the change, the amount of work that we had. And maybe I didn't quite either, but we we went from dating long distance to living together and working 12-hour shifts and covered in sweat and grape juice and loved it actually at the end. And he's now my husband. But when we were figuring out what we wanted to do next, and I was considering, do I apply to veterinary school and go back for another 3-4 years of schooling, or do I just keep working wonderful harvests around the globe? It was a pretty easy choice, at least for me back then. And so we went on to work a harvest first in Australia. Well, our first harvest was here at Hartford, I should clarify, in 2014. And then we worked a harvest in Australia in the McLaren Vale, which was fantastic. Very different varietals there. Also biodynamic farming, which was really fascinating to learn about. And then that next October or September, I should say, we went to Bordeaux, France, and I worked a harvest there. Again, different varietals, different farming methods, different vinification, winemaking. So really incredible experiences to have all back to back. Wow. But at the end of it all, I cried uncle, it was wonderful, really intense, beautiful work, but I wanted a little break from it. And I really enjoyed, we went and moved into working in the tasting room first and then doing sales trips and getting more and more involved with marketing and other aspects. And so, really came to personally enjoy all of those parts of the business too.
The wine world tour.
Yes, it was, so to speak. Yeah.
And I'm sure you met a lot of interesting people just being in the regions.
Yes.
And all the different AVAs. And
exactly. I think
fascinating.
One of the best ways to encapsulate the cultural experience too, I think, was comparing the 3 harvest parties we had. So we had a harvest party here at Hartford that we do every year. And it's very sort of family friendly, home centric. So all of the interns that come from international countries and work the harvest with us often have guest homes that they're staying in. And so their host families will come to that barbecue for us. So we do a big barbecue here. It's pretty sedate. So that's our party. And then in France, it was very much, sort of an elevated multi-course meal as a thank you to all of the cellar crew who had worked so hard during the harvest, beautiful bottles on the table, and beautiful, specific pairings, but much more formal. And then in Australia, it started in the morning with clay shooting. And so we had a beautiful clay shooting, a fun morning. Everyone came in different costumes. And then they opened up bottles from all around the world, very casual, sort of potluck style. And then I don't think it ended until the next morning. So it was very fun in all 3 places. But
Wow, that's so amazing.
Yeah.
Magic of wine is that it definitely brings people together from everywhere and it creates beautiful experiences that can be shared. Exactly.
And, a lot of those relationships, friendships that we made, now over 10 years ago, we still, are some of our closest friends today. So it certainly, you create community over wine, I feel like.
Yes. Well, cheers to that.
Yeah, cheers.
I was strolling in downtown Healdsburg today, and I saw that you have a tasting room as well.
Yeah, we do, yeah. So we have this tasting room where we are today out in Forestville at our winery facility too. So it's both tasting room and production. But we also have that really beautiful tasting space in Healdsburg, right on the square, right across from Dry Creek Kitchen. We've really enjoyed being able to have that. It's great, especially if you're wanting to pop in right before dinner, do a quick tasting. Or you're centralized in Healdsburg and wanting to take advantage of the closer proximity of some of the other tasting rooms that are in the area and sort of condense your time and experience. It's wonderful for that too. We love sending people out here, of course, because you get to experience the place. You're so close to the wine itself. It is sort of a little adventure to get here. We're not actually that far from downtown Santa Rosa or Healdsburg, probably only about 10 or 15 minutes from either, but it feels much more removed. You drive through the winding roads and through the redwood forest and before you drop down into our little beautiful spot right here in Green Valley of Russian River Valley, which is of course a little smaller AVA within Russian River, but yeah.
Nice. Yes. I will definitely be checking out the tasting room next.
Yeah, I hope you will.
Yeah. I'm just curious, how does the experience differ there versus here, like with just wine tastings?
Yeah, so we have the opportunity, I think on request, we could do, an elevated tasting, for example, there in that space, should someone really need, not be able to come out here, for example. But typically we taste slightly smaller amount of wines in that tasting room space, sort of more condensed flight of wines. Whereas here, we not only do we have, a larger library to pull from, where we can actually do, library tastings or our sparkling tastings. But we also offer cheese and charcuterie platters here at this tasting room. And of course, are hosting lots of wonderful events too throughout the year.
Yeah, it's beautiful winery.
Thank you.
And I love just seeing all the vines and magical wine country vibes.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So the next wine that we're going to taste,
it's our Fog Dance Pinot Noir.
Okay.
Yeah. So when I mentioned Green Valley of Russian River Valley, it was a AVA that was established actually the same year that the Russian River Valley was established, and it was delineated a smaller AVA within Russian River because it's recognized as being slightly cooler climate, even in the already cool climate of Russian River. So it has lots of these little pockets that fog likes to settle. And so we named this Pinot Noir vineyard after that. It's named Fog Dance for how the fog dances in and out every morning and evening. Really fun Pinot Noir. I have to say it's one of my favorites that we make, in part because, while it has some very signature notes for Green Valley of Russian River, which will come as like beautiful red cherry fruit, black cherry fruit. It also tends to have this really interesting note of blood orange, which we don't find in our other Pinot Noir vineyards, and I think offers something really interesting and distinct. The other thing that I love about this wine is when almost without fail, when I pop the bottle at first, it often has a slightly dusty notion. That to me, that's the best way to describe it. Some people might describe it more as like a graphite sort of a aromatic, but I love it because it just adds that layer of earth. We feel like every great Pinot Noir, no matter where it comes from, should have a little bit of earth, or that savory component that makes it, a little more interesting and dynamic. So to me, it's there on the aromatics, and it also follows through usually on the palate with some really pretty and very subtle, like sweet tobacco leaf. And along with that beautiful bright fruit that Russian River just gives you naturally. Yeah. The other thing too about this site is it has very classic Gold Ridge soils. So there's a soil throughout Russian River that's probably one of the most predominant, called Gold Ridge fine sandy loam. And it's this really fluffy soil. So you take a couple steps in the vineyard and it puffs around you like this gigantic cloud. You come out looking like Pigpen from the Snoopy comics, for anyone who remembers those. It's also great for growing grapes because the water drains straight through it because it's so fine grained. So you end up with this beautiful concentration of great skin to juice ratio. So great concentration of tannin. It gets very, sexy sort of velvety tannins from wines grown on that site.
Yeah. I had to sniff this a few times. It's so complex. I'm like,
what's in there? Right? Yeah, exactly. I love wines that, of course, there's a reason. There's all sorts of reasons to have a glass of wine. Sometimes, I don't want to have to think about what it tastes like, what it smells like. I just want to be able to drink it and enjoy. However, it's wonderful when a wine can just be delicious. You can just enjoy it, with or without food, and also have that level of dynamic, and complexity that's going on that makes you be more contemplative about it and really be able to study it if you want to.
Yes. This would taste wonderful with a mushroom risotto.
Yes. Yeah. Perfect pairing.
Yes.
Yes. That sounds delicious. Where can we get one?
I know, exactly. I'm going to Google that.
Yeah, exactly.
Very good. Fog Dance, the vineyard is how far from here?
It's probably only about 5 miles from where we are right now. So just a little, if you drove a little bit south of us on Highway 116 and then took a beautiful country road out to Ross Station Road, it's right off of that. And as I said, sort of tucked in between these little hillsides, and it has beautiful views out towards the Sonoma coast. Yeah, really very close. So only about a 8 to 10 minute drive from where we are. So it's actually, in terms of proximity, one of the closest vineyards to the winery itself, besides our little estate grapes that are grown out front.
I am excited about the last one.
Yes, so this is the Zinfandel.
Yeah.
Yes. This is our Hartford vineyard, so single vineyard old vine Zinfandel. So at Hartford, majority of what we make is Pinot Noir, and next Chardonnay, and then we have 6 old vine Zinfandel vineyards. We make a blend. So for those out in the world, probably for each varietal we make, you might more easily come across our Russian River Valley wines. So they're blends of each of the, of Chardonnay, Russian River Valley Chardonnay we make, Russian River Valley Pinot Noir, and then a blend of each of the 6 single vineyard Zinfandels. That is our Russian River Valley Zinfandel. So unlike the single vineyards, which it becomes more like a treasure hunt looking for them out in restaurants and at retailers, the Russian Rivers you might come across more easily. But I wanted to share with you today the Zinfandel vineyard that started it all, which is this the vineyard that I grew up on that I was describing earlier.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting because the Russian River Valley, it's, primarily known for Chardonnay and Pinot, but you have a beautiful Zinfandel as well.
Yes. Yeah, no, so there's sort of a fun story behind that. When my parents first started the winery, it was actually with my grandfather's support. So my grandfather is pretty well known for having founded Kendall Jackson Winery. As he continued to make beautiful wines for Kendall Jackson, which were based on sort of the coolest climate vineyards he could find, hillsides, benches, and mountains, but grown all throughout California to make the Vintners Reserve Chardonnay that has been so popular for years. He really came to have a second passion, which was to really highlight the unique and beautiful qualities of each region in and of its own rights. He came to my parents after the wonderful success of Kendall Jackson in the early 90s and said, I have this dream of having a world-class winery in every important region of the world. And they were like, well, Jess, that's a pretty ambitious goal. He said, yes, it is ambitious. I think I can do it. But I might need some help, And so if you would like to partner with me in that, where would you want to be? And so they chose Russian River. So that was sort of the impetus for founding Hartford Family Winery. And from really early on, they knew they wanted it to be, as I said, focused on single vineyard wines and really Chardonnay and Pinot Noir predominant. There wasn't really the thought to make Zinfandel. But the first home they purchased was had that little old vine Zinfandel vineyard in the backyard. And it was a varietal that my parents just loved already. My dad especially loves history, genealogy, all of that. And, Zinfandel being a very California grape had a lot of appeal and, to us as a family and to my parents in particular. And so being the sentimental sort of guy that my dad was, I think having had to sell the grapes for the first couple of years before we started the winery, each time he sold them, I think as the grapes left the property, he'd cry a little harder. And so when we founded the winery, he's like, well, I'll just bring a little bit of the Zinfandel in. So he did. That being said, my grandfather was not a big fan of Zinfandel. He didn't really consider it a noble varietal and didn't think it really had a place in Hartford Court story. My dad didn't tell him he was bringing the fruit in. And that first year, our winemaker came running up to my dad partway through the fermentation process and was like, Dawn, I think I've made the best wine I've ever made. My dad's like, well, great. Which Pinot Noir is it? He's like, no, it's the Zin from your backyard. And my dad's like, oh, no. Because he knew that he was going to have to go back to his father-in-law and admit that, first of all, he'd brought in the grapes without, asking permission for, to do it. That he, instead of just selling it off as bulk wine, if it tasted as great as our winemaker thought it did, and it did, he was going to want to bottle it. So that's why we actually, even still today, it's not so much that anyone would really notice. We technically have 2 labels. We have our Hartford Court label for our Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, and we have a Hartford label for our Zinfandel. Someday maybe we'll bring it all in the same family, but the labels don't look very much distinct one from the other at this point. As I said, Zinfandel is very near and dear to our hearts, and we're really glad that we did that. You know, it's always had amazing acclaim. This actually vintage that we're tasting made Wine Spectator's top 100 of the year, so that was very exciting for us. And it's, like I said, you know, has had wonderful reviews. So.
Yes.
Yeah.
I definitely taste the high risk, high reward.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
This wine is very special because it tastes fresh. A lot of Zinfandels are a little bit more jammy.
Yes.
But you taste the very fresh, like a hand-picked blackberry note.
Yeah, exactly.
It's very unique.
Right. That's, you pinpointed one of the things that we came to think was so remarkable about this vineyard in particular, and then the other vineyards that we started to work with all are in Russian River Valley, and it's such a cold growing region for Zinfandel, you know, relative to other climates that are really known for the varietal, that you get those, you know, you get that retention of acidity and brightness of fruit that you just often don't find. You know, you, instead of dates and plums, you get more fresh picked blackberry or bright raspberry sometimes even. And so that made it really intriguing to us. It becomes a little more balanced style of Zinfandel, I think, more food friendly. The other two things that we've sort of identified as things that we love about ours and relative to others is that we make it like our Pinot Noir, which is a little different from, I think, especially a lot of producers early on in the 90s, but even maybe till today, a lot of producers want to treat Zinfandel more like a Cabernet. And you might think, given the amount of tannin that Zin has, that you could do that. But Zin is actually relatively thin-skinned, and so when you treat it like a Cab, which is a little more masochistic of a varietal, you crush it before you put it in the tank, you mix it really rigorously. When you do that to a thinner-skinned varietal like Zinfandel, which is a little more akin to Pinot Noir, you create these really short tannin chains. It becomes very rustic on the mouth and more like a burlap grip. And I don't know, we don't really want to rub burlap all over our tongue. You know, we'd rather rub velvet, you know, so we joke we're pushing the needle maybe from burlap to linen, you know, in terms of texture. But by treating the grapes really gently, we hope to make a little more elegant style of Zinfandel.
It definitely has a lingering finish on the palate.
Yeah, exactly. I also love the sort of more herbal notes sometimes that I find. Like often there's this really pretty sweet fennel seed or anise on the aromatics. Yeah, and then the other thing too, I think, being over 100-year-old vines, all of these vineyards, some of them are closer to 120, you get that beautiful concentration of flavor still. So you get that balance of bright fruit, beautiful concentration, but then that sort of more soft, more elegant style of texture.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite dish that you like to pair with this wine?
Oh, gosh. It's hard to choose. One of my favorite, I guess, though, is like a fig and prosciutto pizza, because I love that mix of fruit, you know, to complement the fruit that's already existing, of course, in the profile of the wine, and then those that earthiness of the prosciutto itself. So that's one of my favorites. And then, of course, you can never go wrong with Zinfandel and barbecue.
Exactly. I'm ready for a summer party.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. It's been one of our most popular ones. We often will do a Zinfandel barbecue party, and we'll pair different Zinfandels, you know, all of our single vineyards with different styles of barbecue. So one year it was like a Korean rib, you know, and so each time it's really fun.
So on the note of like club membership here, what does that look like? Yeah,
so we have a pretty thriving, very loyal club following, having been established as long as we are. And so we're really excited and proud to have their membership. Of course, we have a couple different offerings. You know, probably our most popular is our mixed club, which basically gives you a sampling of all of the three core varietals that we make: Chardonnay, Pinot, and Zinfandel. But then we, of course, have Chardonnay only, Zinfandel only, and then a couple of those allocation wines too, like the sparklings that get you some benefits that way.
Nice.
Yeah.
The club members go to both the winery and the tasting room?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So, they get complimentary tasting up to, I think it's 4 a year, either of the locations.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
I'm going to add that to my list.
Yes, of course. Yeah, I hope so. No, and of course, depending on the sort of level of club membership, how many cases a year that you're purchasing, you also can get different shipping benefits, different things like that, alongside all of the fun parties that we love to host. Our parties are pretty popular.
Nice. You sell your wine here at the winery, but also online?
We do, yeah. So we have an online, and we have our website itself, hartfordwines.com, and where you can buy them, direct from us. And then, of course, we love visitors at the tasting room. You can taste the wines before you purchase, and we have that both here and at the Healdsburg location.
So, Hailey, one of my favorite questions to ask is, well, if you could share a bottle of wine, and in this case, Hartford Family Winery, with anyone dead or alive, who would it be?
That one is a hard one always. Do I have to choose one person?
Well, hey, many.
Yeah.
Or few.
I guess who I almost always would choose is my family. I think, maybe that's sort of selfish, and you would probably think, given the amount of times that we get to open bottles together, that would, get old, and maybe I should choose someone else. I don't know. But I think for me, working in my family's business, part of it is because we all both enjoy being together, first of all, but that interaction and that community building that sort of happens both as, an intimate family as well as with our broader community, I think is what, again, has drawn me to wine. And so any chance that I get to open a bottle with my family, so my parents, my brother, my husband, and our kids, although of course they're not drinking, they're 7 and 4 years old, that's probably who I would choose.
Yeah, that's very sweet. My earliest memories of wine was actually with them. Yeah. I would come to wine country even before I could drink, because I really enjoyed the experience around it and people coming together. So I totally hear what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. There's something really magical, I think, too, about wine compared to other beverages. I love a margarita, don't get me wrong, but there's something about, the format. You have a bottle and you're not usually drinking it alone. Of course, you could if you really want to, and I hope over a very responsible period of time. But, you're usually opening a bottle with people, right? And enjoying it with people. And I think that sort of communal aspect of wine in particular relative to other beverages makes it something that's just really celebratory and special.
And do you have a favorite wine experience that just lingers in your mind that
over the years, something that stands out? I think probably one of them is from when I worked my very first harvest when I was 18. I took a gap year between high school and college, and I did a lot of veterinary internships, but I also worked the harvest in France. It was also in Bordeaux, and it was with a really wonderful family. I was living with the winemaker and his son, and the winemaker actually ended up bringing his mother, who was at the time, I think, around 92 years old, to visit for a while. And she was such a remarkable person, just very poised and energetic. And she, the meals that we had that she cooked for us too at 90-something years old, she was just a force to be reckoned with. And I didn't speak any French at the time. She didn't speak any English, and I'd offer in my broken French to try and help her with the meal, and she'd look at me and she'd go, "Oh, no, you're so." I could tell what she was saying, in French was like, "You're adorable, but just sit down. I've got this." But those interactions that we had, crossing different cultures and always having one little glass of wine at lunch or at dinner was something that was really eye-opening to me. And I think showed how, wine in moderation can be a really beautiful thing to enjoy and can help break down those barriers, where language sometimes isn't even able to.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Of course. Yeah.
Because I also went to Bordeaux and I had such a wonderful experience, and people were very open.
Yes.
And I learned so much from them. And that's why I love wine travel.
Yes.
Because it just opens your mind to the world
Yeah.
and people.
Yeah, exactly.
And of course, there's the final product as well, but it's just part of the experience.
Yes. Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree.
Yes. Well, cheers,
Yeah,
Hailey.
cheers.
Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, so grateful that you could come out, Rachel, and enjoy a tasting with us. And yeah, I hope we'll see each other often.
Yes, for sure. Well, cheers to
Cheers.
that.
Yeah.